I think we might start. So here's the plan for today. Hopefully we'll finish looking at the ethics in Indian philosophy. I'll start off by doing a little bit of Buddhist stuff that we didn't quite finish last time. Then we look at the so-called ethics of the Charvaks. They're the materialists in the Indian tradition. Some of their criticisms are quite interesting, and of the Hindu and the Buddhist view. They criticize both the views. And then towards the end of today's lecture, I want to talk a little bit about the main similarities and the main points of difference between the Buddhist and the Hindu views. Just to get them straight in your head, and then from next week on, we can move on to looking at metaphysics, which is, I think, a lot of fun. I think a lot more fun than the ethics, but you can tell me what you guys think. So let me start off by talking about the Buddhist theories. There's two things I wanted to say. One, talking about, a positive reconstruction of the Buddhists. So imagine the Buddhists, imagine the world according to the Buddhist. According to the Buddhist, what the world looks like is, bundles of physical and mental states joined together by causal relations. So bundled together by causal relations because physical states cause mental states and mental states cause physical states, right? So the physical and mental states are joined together by causal relations, and these bundles are connected to other bundles. Now, they're connected to other bundles at the same time, so there are lots of other, contemporary or contemporaneous bundles that these bundles of mental states, mental and physical states are joined to, and also these bundles of mental and physical states cause future bundles. So if you, kind of step back and look at the world in a four-dimensional, set out in a four-dimensional space, all you get is mental and physical states, or just physical states joined together by causal relations. And in this world, in this Buddhist picture, the idea is that we should not draw sharp boundaries between ourselves and others. That's the main Buddhist point. The whole world is, bundles of physical and mental states, or just bundles of physical states for these chairs and tables and your computers. Hopefully they're not intelligent. And causal relations. And all this is impersonal. On the Buddhist view, there are no persons to be found. Given this picture, keep that image in mind. Given this picture, what Buddhism says is that it's irrational to act in self-interest. It is irrational to be selfish, because anything that this current bundle of physical and mental states does is going to affect all other bundles that it is causally interacting with. It's not going to affect only the future bundle that you will be, or your future self. It is going to affect all other bundles. So therefore, the right action, or the rational attitude, is to act in a way so that all the bundles around you, all the bundles that you're causally interacting with, benefit from your actions. Kind of, some people say that Buddhism gets you to a utilitarian kind of theory. The idea is that your actions should benefit all those who are going to be affected by your action. A moral action is right if it benefits all those who are affected by that action. It maximizes satisfaction of good things or preferences, as some utilitarians like Peter Singer say, of all those who are going to be affected by your actions, not just your future self. So that's the right way to act. Buddhism, in that sense, is a practical philosophy. It's not concerned with giving you the right metaphysics or giving you the right theory of identity or anything like that. Their main concern as I've said last time, is to reduce suffering in the world. And so according to the Buddhists, the right kind of attitude to have is, to benefit all those who are going to be affected by the action, and to realize that your well-being is tied up with the well-being of all others around you. So we not only have to be concerned with our own well-being, but also with the well-being of all others. So your action should not be, but at the same time, you've got to realize that it's your action should not be motivated by self-interest, but at the same time, it should not be motivated by self-denying altruism. You are one of the bundles, and insofar as every bundle that is important, that you're interacting with is important, your future bundle also has to be cared for. So some people say, oh, this cannot be rational, that I don't care about my future bundle and I care about all the other bundles. That's not what Buddhism is saying. It's meant to be the middle way between, or the middle path between, on the one hand, self-interest, on the other hand, self-denying altruism. You don't have to, completely deny yourself or not care about your bundle at all and think about the other bundles. So this is what they say. The right attitude to all individualities, whether past or future selves or contemporary others, is the same. You should have the same attitude towards the past selves, the future selves, and contemporary others. Loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So the first three should be, clear. You have to act in a loving, kind manner, with compassion, and have sympathy towards the joy and pain of others. Equanimity is kind of, the Buddhist, I think, equanimity is a state of mind which is undisturbed, which is not perturbed, so to say. So it's only in the higher states of, towards when you're very close to moksha, not moksha according to the Buddhists, nirvana according to the Buddhists, when you're close to liberation, the saints are not affected at all by any pleasure or pain. That is the kind of idea. That's the ideal of a saint, someone who's not moved by pleasure or pain. That's the way you act. You don't act with, but you have to realize that there is an important difference here between the Buddhist and the Hindus. Remember, the Hindus deny any kind of compassion, any kind of passion or desire or feeling. All the discussion that we did with the Gita was all focused on, denying any kind of passion playing a role in action. Actions have to be motivated just by duty. I know you're sick of hearing this after writing about this. Actions have to be motivated just by the duty and nothing more. The Buddhists are different in the sense that they allow passions. They allow passions to play a role, but you must realize they differentiate between, negative passions, if you like, or negative emotions and positive ones. The ones they allow in is loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So they're positive emotions. You shouldn't act out of, guilt or jealousy or greed. Those would be negative emotions. But the important thing to realize is that the Buddhist is not denying emotions or passions having a role, having a positive role. Passions can motivate you to act positively. I'll come back to this difference, but I just wanted to note it. So now let's talk about a couple of problems with the Buddhist view. One, we sort of discussed last time. What happens to the notion of moral responsibility if we live in this moral community, so to say? Given the image I started with at the background, if you have that at the back of your mind, and there really are no sharp boundaries between people. The world is such that there are no sharp boundaries between you and me. What happens to notions of moral responsibility? If I commit a crime, are my parents, are my friends somewhat responsible? Because after all, they've had a causal influence in the kinds of mental states I have. This is the moral communitarianism worry. Once you break barriers between selves, what happens to the notion of responsibility? It gets spread around as well, right? If you are not, totally in control, because you are the way you are because of causal influences that affect the kind of being, the kind of mental and physical states you have, then does that mean you are not fully responsible? I think it does. For the Buddhist, it does. Is that a good thing? Is moral communitarianism a good thing? Sharing of responsibility. I'm not asking this question from a legal point of view. Sure, it's not going to work. I can't, if I've been caught drunk driving, I can't go to court and say, my friends asked me to have that extra glass of wine or that extra beer, and so it's really not me. They talked me into it. That's a different question. That's about legal responsibility. Sure, the judge is not going to listen to that kind of a lame excuse. It's going to say, you are responsible, Monima, and you either pay the fine, or if it was bad enough, lose your license or go behind bars, depending on how much over the limit I was, right? So we're not talking about the question of legal responsibility. We're talking about the question of moral responsibility. What do you think? There's no moral court, so to say, but what do you think? Is sharing of responsibility a good thing or a bad idea? Because I think that's one of the upshots of the Buddhist picture, that responsibility has to be shared around. You're not wholly responsible for your actions. Do you think that's a good thing? Anyone think it is a good thing? No? People want to take sole responsibility for what they do? Yeah?
You can take sole responsibility and still put it into context. You wouldn't judge this like the same action different people do depending on the context that they're in. That doesn't mean that you have to share responsibility. It's spoken to a deeper individual.
So you think finally it is up to you to do what you do, and therefore, if this is one of the upshots of the Buddhist view, there's probably something wrong with it. Any disagreement on that before we move on? What do I think? I think, there's something to be said about, your own responsibility, about how responsible you are for making, especially the kind of example I gave. I'm not by any means suggesting that, a person who has extra drinks and drives is not responsible. I think, they can... of course, we can talk about coercion. If someone, holds a gun on my head or forces me to drink or puts a drip or, spikes my drink or something like that without me knowing, then I'm not responsible. But I think, the Buddhist wants to do it in all kinds of cases, and that doesn't add up. Because if you lose responsibility, then, the notion of free will is gone as well. Then the notion of moral responsibility really goes away. So I think we need some kind of notion of individual in order to hold on to the notion of moral responsibility. Another point that I want you to think about regarding the Buddhist view, they have very good, motivation, but does the view really add up? And the second thing, I've called it on the handout, the asymmetric consideration. So remember what the Buddhist is saying. The kind of relation that you have to your past self is exactly the same kind of relation that you have to your future self, right? Causal relations make you the kind of person you are right now, and they will affect your future self. But the Buddhist also says that you are responsible. Remember we looked at those bits about karma last time, saying, why are people born wise or foolish or tall and slim or whatever, the Buddhist answer is on account of their karma. So the Buddhist says, on the one hand, you have to completely give up, self-concern or concern about your future self. On the other hand, you must be responsible for your past actions. Doesn't quite add up. If causal relations are what bind me to the past and to the future, then if causal relations are what really bind me to the past and the future, if I am, responsible for my past self, then I should be, somewhat caring. I should have some responsibility. I should have some, degree of affection or concern for my future self. So in saying that, we have to give up all concern, all selfish concerns, the Buddhist is kind of, I feel, there's an asymmetry here. If the relation between, the past self and the future self with the current self is the same, the past self bears the responsibility, but I can't have concern for my future self. Doesn't quite add up. Again, it's like saying the Buddhist wants you to live a certain way, but the metaphysics doesn't quite hold up at the bottom. Yeah.
So does the karma that you receive, so it's the karma that you receive depends not only on you, but on everyone around you, because they're causally influencing you. Does the karma that you receive only affect your future, or do you kind of give out karma and say that you receive it?
Well, look, the way the Buddhists talk about it, that's coming back to the concern. The Buddhist texts are in the form of analogies, right? You get that analogy. It depends on the seed. The kind of fruit you will get depends on the seed. Now, if you think of the seed as karmic residues, and karmic residues are on account of actions, but the actions are influenced by actions of the others, it's not very clear. That's where, is the difference. You get the difference between using an analogy and giving an argument. When you use an analogy, you can get away with, some vague stuff. Now, we really don't know the answer to that question. Is it really your karma, or is it others' karma as well that is responsible for making you what you are? If the Buddhists were completely, so here's something to notice. The Buddhist metaphysics is influenced by their ethical theory, heavily influenced by the ethical theory. And they want to uphold that ethical theory at the cost of whatever metaphysics fits it, right? Even if it's not a very good metaphysics, it just has to, because their main concern is a practical concern. Their main concern is a practical concern about how we should live, what kind of beings we should be, not what kind of being we really are. That's not the question the Buddhist is interested in answering. So, you have to keep in mind their sole motivation is to make us, better beings in some sense, whatever they think is better. And yes, their metaphysics doesn't add up. But I think, the Buddhists try very hard to respond to the Hindu criticisms and, come up with a consistent metaphysics. But I don't think in their heart of heart they really care that much. It doesn't add up. Tough luck. You can keep criticizing me. I'm sure that's, if there was a Buddhist listening to me, they would say, yeah, the metaphysics doesn't add up, so what? The ethics is, it's not philosophically satisfying, but for someone who's got a particular motive and they make clear, so there, here's how one contemporary scholar, Evan Thompson, who's a very good scholar of Buddhism, here's how he puts it, that the Buddhists, when the Buddhists say knowing things as they really are is really important, all that the Buddhist means is knowing things. What they mean by saying knowing things as they really are is saying that, we see things in a way so that they reduce suffering. So there is a moral sort of motivation behind. They don't want to see the world as it really is. They're not doing science. They want to see the world. They want to paint a picture of the world. If the world was like this, we could all behave in a way so that suffering overall would be reduced. You know, that's the kind of thing. It's not doing science. Their view is affected by a moral motivation about, you know, how do we want the world to be is affecting how they see the world to be. It's that kind of fit between ethics and metaphysics. Mostly in the Western tradition, you will find it the other way around. In the Hindu tradition, also it is the other way around. The metaphysics comes first and the ethics comes later. The Buddhists, they start with how we should be, and so their picture, if you like, is a bit colored by what they want it to be. And they're just going to accept it. The Buddhists just accept it. What's the point believing that we are really separate, distinct entities if all that's going to do is cause more pain? That's what they will say.
Just going to ask what the name of that author was.
Evan Thompson, E-V-A-N. Thompson. He's at the University of British Columbia in Canada, and he's got a very big website. You can go and look at some papers. He's got a recent book, which is an excellent book, but of course I'm not suggesting that you read the whole thing. What's it called? Waking, Dreaming, and Being. Mostly a Buddhist conception. You might like to read the last chapter, which is quite interesting. And it's in the electronic resources in the library. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions about Buddhism before we move on? Any other things that I've missed that you want to add? No? Let's move on to the Charvak metaphysics. So the Charvaks, remember, are the materialists in the Indian tradition. And of course, the Indian political scene is dominated by the Hindus, mostly. And also the Buddhists are, you know, getting some political space. These poor guys are badly misrepresented. It is very difficult to find original Charvak texts. What you find is, you know, their readings in things like, you know, the text that I have here, and we'll read in a minute, is from what is called the Compendium of All Philosophies. So it's not written by the Charvaks. It's someone, you know, reporting on what were the various philosophies. It's kind of a history of philosophy text, which does not do justice. For the Hindus, you easily find original texts. For the Buddhists, you find the original sutras and other commentaries in original texts. For the Charvak, it's very difficult to find these texts. So you will see that some of the views are, you know, somewhat misrepresented in the literature. I'll point out some things. I can say with confidence that they're misrepresented because recently there have been a few scholars who've been trying to find original Charvak texts. And again, if this is the tradition that really takes your fancy, there is something called the Journal of Indian Philosophy. It's a very textual journal, not a philosophy east and west kind of journal, which does a comparative work, which is, you know, the sort of thing we're doing in this course. It's a very textual journal, but there have been some recent, and some of the articles in that journal are just, you know, translations of texts. And so recently they found some texts, the original text of the Charvaks, and some, so if you just search the Journal of Indian Philosophy, if you're interested, and go and look at, and just type in Charvaks in the search thing, you will get some Charvak texts, translations of Charvak texts if you're interested in looking at them. But we're not going to look at them in this course. They're quite detailed. We'll just stick to, you know, how they're represented, but I'll point out a few things where I think they've been badly misrepresented. So here's the starting point for the Charvak. They deny, and remember I've been saying all Indians believe all existence is suffering. The Hindus believe it, the Buddhists believe it, the Charvaks deny it. They say all existence cannot be suffering, and it is. In fact, they say, they use these kinds of words, or they're represented as using these kinds of words, that, you know, only stupid people would believe that view. They believe that life is a mixture of pleasure and pain, and, you know, everything that we do, we try to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And pain comes with pleasure. They're not denying it, but here's what they have to say. Let me read out a bit to give you a sense of how they say it. So this is on page 148 and 149. You'll see it says, Sarv Darshan Sangrah. Sarv means all, Darshan means philosophy, Sangrah means compendium. Compendium of all the philosophies. This is from there. So while life is yours, live joyously. None can escape death's searching eye. When once this frame of yours they burn, how shall it ever return? They don't believe in rebirth. They don't believe in going to heaven or any of that sort of thing. They say, while you have a life, live joyously, because you can't escape death. Once they burn, because the Indians had the, you know, tradition of cremation, once they burn your frame, you know, how can it ever return again? So furthermore, this is what they say: the only end of man is enjoyment produced by sensual pleasures. Nor may you say that such cannot be called the end of man. So they're also talking about end of man is not liberation, end of man is not moksha, it's not nirvana, it's just pleasure. Nor may you say that such cannot be called the end of man, as they are always mixed with some kind of pain. It can't be, pleasure can't be an end because it's always mixed with some kind of pain. Because it is our wisdom to enjoy the pure pleasure as far as we can and avoid the pain which inevitably accompanies it. So what if there is a lot of pain? Just as the man who desires the fish, you know, takes the fish with their scales and bone, and having taken as much as he wants, leaves the rest. Or just as the man who desires rice takes the rice with the straw and all, and having taken as much as he wants, leaves the rest. So, you know, you can't give up the good things in life just because they come with, you know, a bit of pain, because they will cause a bit of craving. You know, don't we eat fish and take out the scales and the bone because they're not as pleasant? We eat the rice, clean it up, get the husk out, so on and so forth. So they think it's just a stupid idea to think just because pleasure is mixed with pain, we should give up, we should reject pleasure as being an end of life. So it is not therefore for us, through a fear of pain, to reject pleasure, which our nature instinctively recognizes as congenial. So very strong hedonist, you know, instinctively we recognize pleasure as congenial. Men do not refrain from sowing rice because they're wild beings. So we take all sorts of risks. You know, things go wrong, yes, but we don't give up all pleasures just because things go wrong. So it's a very worldly, you know, sort of common sense philosophy, if you like. They're talking about, you know, how is it that we really act? We take the pleasure with the pain. We try and separate as much as possible. We take risks, yes. There can be suffering, but we shouldn't, we shouldn't give up all pleasure just because there is suffering. And this stuff about, let me read a little more to give you a sense of, you know, what it is that they want to say. So they're also called, this is on page 151, they're also called lokaitika. Lokaitika just means people, this worldly. Lok means world, aitika means someone who's concerned with this world. They don't believe in anything beyond this world. They don't believe in heaven and hell. They don't believe in liberation. So according to the Lokaitika doctrine, the four elements alone are the ultimate principles: earth, water, fire, and air. There is none other. And they're against, you know, things like karma or anything. there's no need to postulate the existence of merit and demerit from happiness and misery. Just because there's pleasure and pain or happiness and misery doesn't mean we need to postulate this other thing, the merit and demerit. A person is happy or miserable through the laws of nature. There is no other cause. Who paints the peacocks or who makes the cuckoos sing? There exists no cause excepting nature. So one thing they want to do, one very important thing they want to do is they want to, in their rejection of karma, in their rejection of moksha, in their rejection of rebirth, they want to pull apart, the moral and the natural world. They say everything that happens because of natural causes. We do not need to postulate moral causes. We do not need, remember when we were looking at the Hindu philosophy, these were the assumptions that were worrying. All existence is suffering. Why should we accept that? And the Buddhist also had that. And the other thing that, the moral, or how we act, the moral worth of our actions explains how we are. The moral explains the natural. And the Charvaks want to pull these two notions apart. They say, the natural world cannot be explained. Why is a baby born with a certain birth deficit? Well, there is only an explanation in nature. There is no moral explanation for this, because for them there is no previous birth and there is going to be no future birth, right? So there has to be, that's why they say things like, who makes the cuckoos sing? It's nature. There is no other cause excepting nature. So they want to take away this thing from the Buddhists and the Hindus that brought together the moral and the natural world, saying that, what explains nature is our moral actions in the past. Charvakas won't have any bit of that. They say the only explanation, so they reject moksha, they reject karma, they reject rebirth, transmigration, all of that. The fire is hot, the water cold and refreshing, cool the breeze of the morning. By whom came this variety? From their own nature it was born. It's because of the nature of things. There is no heaven, there is no final liberation, nor any other soul in the world, nor do the actions of the four castes, so this is going against the Hindus, produce any real effect. The Agnihotra, so they're also against any sacred rituals, sacrifices, all of those things. The Agnihotras, the three Vedas, the ascetics, and smearing oneself with the ashes were made, so this is, note this is a kind of a political criticism of the Hindus, were made by nature as the livelihood of those destitute of knowledge and manliness. So what they want to say is, their criticism of the Hindu, the elaborate Hindu rituals, sacrifices, and the way of life is, look at all these people. Why do they come up with, such a elaborate, that's not going to make such an elaborate, ritual and sacrifices and so on, that's not going to make any difference to the way we are. These are made by people who are, who don't have, anything, they're foolish, they don't have anything else to live on. The Brahmins are making up, so to say, this view. This is what they have to say. There is no world other than this, no heaven and no hell. The realm of Shiva and the other regions are invented by stupid impostors of other schools of thought. The enjoyment of heaven lies in eating delicious food, keeping company of young women, using fine clothes, perfumes, garlands, sandal paste, and so on. The pain of hell lies in troubles that arise from enemies, weapons, diseases, while liberation is death, which is the cessation of life breath. The wise, therefore, ought not to take pains on account of liberation. It is only the fool himself who wears himself out by penances, fasts, sacrifices, etc. The Hindus believe in all this kind of ritual. Chastity and other ordinances are laid down by clever weaklings. Gifts of gold, and land, the pleasure of invitations to dinner are devised by indigent people with stomachs lean with hunger. They're actually, sort of having a go at the Brahmins. They think the Brahmins make up this elaborate story, to dupe the masses, so to say. You should do this, and you have to fast, and you must have the sacrifice. Who comes and performs the sacrifice? Who comes and does the ritual for breaking the fast? It's the Brahmins. And so the Charvakas is saying they make up this elaborate story, to fool us so that we do exactly what they want. The construction of temples, houses for the water supply, tanks, wells, resting places is praised only by travelers, not by others. The three Vedas, the ash smearing, are ways of gaining livelihood for those lacking in intellect and energy. That's what they have to say of the Brahmins. They make up these stories to fool us all so that they can get away with an easy life. So it's a very, moral and a political criticism of the Hindus, because they think that the Brahmins, this is a worry. The Brahmins are the ones who have hold of the Vedas. They tell you what the Vedas have to say. They tell you what the texts have to say. They hold all the knowledge. So these Charvaks are saying they just spread this myth around. They just spread this myth around, and we all have to believe it. We all have to believe it. Who benefits from this? It's the Brahmins who benefits from this. Who suffers? We ordinary people suffer on account of this. And, they say they're lacking in energy. And if you read this section, you'll also notice there's often the mention of Brihaspati. That's the founder of the Charvaks. So they say sometimes, so says Brihaspati, or so thinks Brihaspati. That's the founder of the Charvaks. One other point to make. So in the text that they're represented as saying that according to these people, perception is the only source of knowledge. So the only way we can find something out is perception, not they reject inference. So remember when I was explaining the law of karma, I used the idea that, karma can be thought of as best explanation for the way the things behave. And arguments to the best explanation are inferential arguments. So, here's an example that I have demonstrated before. When I drop this pen, why does it go down? Because of gravity. You can't see gravity, but you infer gravity on account of behavior of things, And that's the idea of inference. And the Charvakas are represented here, are represented in these texts as rejecting inference. They think perception is the only source of knowledge. So the only thing that they're going to believe is perception. So this is what they say. Only the perceived exists. The unperceivable does not exist by reason of its never having been perceived. Even the believers in the invisible never say that the invisible has been perceived. So they don't want to say that invisible things, karma, and so on, laws, but the Hindus, sort of represent them as saying that they don't regard any inference. They don't regard any inference as valid. And if that's the case, if all inferences are regarded as invalid, that would make practical behavior very difficult. So if you see smoke at a distance, or you smell, even you might not be able to see. You smell smoke in the room, you think something is wrong, something is burning, and you try and raise an alarm, or you try and figure out because it might be dangerous. If we say, oh, the connection between smoke and fire, we really don't know. There is, because we can't really see the fire, there might not be a fire. That's an inference. From smoke, we infer fire. Right? That's not the kind of inference that the Charvaks reject. The Charvaks are only rejecting the kind of inference that we think, where we postulate the unperceivable things. So karma is one inference. You know, gravity is probably something that they will try and reject because, you know, there is no, if you like, no perceptual evidence for gravity. But there is perceptual evidence for the connection between smoke and fire. You know, there's perceptual evidence for that. We can often see those things together. So they're often misrepresented as saying that they reject all kinds of inferences, but I think there is enough in the journal I was mentioning earlier to say that no, they're only rejecting those inferences which have no perceptual support. Inferences where, you know, there is some perceptual support are not rejected by the Charvakas. Let's see what else. Okay, so I think I have said everything. One last point to make. So one of the other things that the Charvakas, one of the other points that they want to make is they're against the, what, you know, I might call impartialist ethics that the Buddhists and the Hindus are talking about. I say impartialist because the Hindus say you cannot be motivated by any, you know, any desires or any passions or any emotions. You can't do something for someone just because you love them. That would be a bad thing, according to the Hindus. You know, you should do it because it's your duty. If you, you know, send your child for violin lessons or, you know, buy the McDonald's or whatever it is, just because you love your child and you want them to have a good time, the Hindus will say bad idea, bad karma. You should only be motivated by things, you know, you should do it because it's your duty, not because, you know, you're carried away by love. So that's their worry, that if you let emotions come in, they will lead you astray. So it's better to block them out completely. The Buddhist will allow some emotions, but, you know, again, the Buddhist will say only the positive emotions are allowed, and, you know, we have to sort of, we have to have no special relationships. I mean, when I say both the Buddhist and Hindus are worried about put forward an impartialist ethics, they mean that there is no place for special relationships in these philosophies. So thinking about, you know, love, friendship, things, family, you know, the sorts of things that lead us to do, that motivate us to act in certain ways. The Buddhists and the Hindus are going to say those special obligations or those special connections should be left out of the moral picture. That's not being moral. You know, that's being guided by some other consideration other than being moral. The Charvaks completely deny that. The Charvaks say that special obligations, you know, special relationships that we have make us the kind of beings that we are. You know, they have to have a place. Impartialist ethics is not the kind of thing that is right for human beings. We, by nature, are social beings and form special relationships, and they should have a place in our, you know, in the way we behave morally. So an example, just to give you an example, carrying on from that story of the Mahabharata, you know, the Gita that we looked at, you know, that war is going to happen and Arjun suddenly loses all motivation to fight. The war happens. Arjun and his brothers finally win the war. They've killed their cousins. Remember, all the cousins and the grandfather and the teacher, all of them have been killed. And so finally there's the victory march into the town, into the center of town, into the city, and the Pandavas, these brothers who have won the war, are celebrating. And there a Charvak stands up and says, shame on you. Because they think, you know, a person who can behave like that can never be trusted. How can you be trusted? You know, to run this kingdom, you have behaved so badly with your own family, you have, you know, given it no special sort of status to your family, your teachers, your elders, your cousins. You killed them all. You know, this is nothing to be celebrated. This is something you should be, you know, you should be thrown out for this. You can never be trusted as the king. That's what the Charvak has to say. And that's bringing back, that story brings back they're not just thinking about these impartialist duties laid out by the the text, that the Kshatriyas should do this and the Brahmins should do this and the Vaishyas and the Shudras should do this, this, and the Buddhist that says, we should treat all beings equally. That's just not right according to these Charvaks. And there's very similar concerns in the Western philosophy tradition as well. Now, I've been talking about utilitarianism, benefit all those who are affected by your action. Where is the place for special obligations? In this picture, there's often this, counterexample against Peter Singer and other people who have the utilitarian kind of ethics, and also against Kant. Kant has, more has a duty ethic, if you like, deontological ethic, which says duty for the sake of duty. Kant also has some of that. And so Kant says if, you go and see a friend in hospital, this is an actual example in the text, but you do it because you feel, because, you want to be there for your friend, that's not the right motivation. You should only go and see your friend because it's the right thing to do. For you, it is the right thing to do. It's your duty to do the right thing. So imagine turning up at hospital, and your friend says, very nice of you to come. Oh, no worries. I just am doing my duty. I've got nothing, I don't feel, oh no, I was concerned about you. If you say that, you've lost the moral game, according to Kant. That's just the wrong kind of motivation. The right motivation is it's your duty to go and do that, and so you just do it. Without any pleasure, saying, I really felt like coming, or, I was concerned about you, I wanted to see you. That is just the wrong thing to do. But these Charvaks are not like that. These materialists think, yes, these special obligations, these special relationships matter, and they have to be taken into account when we say what is the best way for us to live. Best way for us to live is not like robots doing their duty just because it is our duty, or robots acting selflessly just because that will create a better world. What makes us human, what makes us flourish, is taking into account these special relationships that make us what we are. And I think this is sort of an important, if you like, point of concern that has been raised even against the West, in the West. On the one hand, you want ethics, you want morality to be impartial. It can't be selfish. Selfish action is not moral action. Basically, moral comes when, it is concern for others. On the other hand, if you make it totally concern for others, you lose something that is special about, human beings are not just robots. They're not just morons doing what they're told to do. They feel a certain way. And it's in some Western philosophers, are now talking about, if you've done the first year, course, Life, Death, and Morality, there is a paper there by Rachel's on special obligations and concerns about impartialist ethics. So it's something to note that when you're studying ethics, there is this tension between you wanting it to be impartial on the one hand, on the other hand, losing something that is especially significant, I think, for human beings to flourish. It is special relationships. The kind of love, care, sympathy that you get from beings around you that makes you, flourish, that makes you the kind of being you are. But these cannot work together. It's a very important, difficult problem. All I want to say here is, look, that problem was noticed even all those centuries back in India. There was the impartialist as well as the partialist who thought, we need a richer account of moral values. They're not just saying pleasure is the only thing they care about. They're also saying there are some things, you Hindus and Buddhists are missing out on to give a right account of how human beings should live, or how they should act, or how they can be better beings. And that's the space. That is the place of special relations. Do you want to say something? Yeah.
Can you make an argument for saying that even if you act out of duty, there's nothing wrong with feeling passion and affection grandmum that you really like.
Mm-hmm.
She's there when you go to hospital to see her.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, so you love her, and when you go to see her, you kind of there's a part that's being played by the fact that you like your grandma.
Yeah.
There's a part that's there that it's really close to the family.
Yeah.
But at its core, you have to have duty. You say you've got a different grandma, which you actually hate. Really, really horrible to you. You still have to go and see her because she's your family.
Right.
So maybe like duty is what would make you go to your grandmother, which that's what you have to do. But you can also, even now, acting out of duty, do so and feel love. There's nothing you wouldn't be like, oh no, you're feeling love. That's not cool. As long as in the core you're acting out of duty, you can wrap that around feelings of love and passion.
Any reactions to that? Is that kind of a compatible picture? You know, if you just act out of duty, that's a better thing, because then you will do things that you like and that you dislike, but you should do. That way you get, the grandmother you hate gets to see you, and the grandmother you love gets to see you, and you really enjoy being with being with her. So duty should be the motivation. Yes, love can play a role, but it should not be the guiding force. Is that the point? Does that sound like a good compromise to you? Do you think that's a way of getting out of this impartialist stuff? Let duty motivate my actions. I'll keep the love, and I'll keep the sympathy, and I'll keep, all that in a different compartment, and just let it be there, but not let it motivate me. What if you said to your lover or your wife or your husband or your partner, the only reason why I'm doing this is duty. I love you, but, that doesn't move me in the least. How would they feel? Or how would you feel if someone said to you, your distress doesn't move me in the least? What moves me is it's my duty, and I'm doing it to get my moksha if I was a Hindu, my nirvana if I was a Buddhist, or, my brownie points if I was a utilitarian or a deontologist, Kantian. I'm just doing it because it's my duty. Doesn't that, at the core, sound very selfish? I mean, do you want to be in relationships like that with people who just act out of duty, with no concern, you want emotions to move you, don't you? I mean, doesn't that sound right? You want emotions to move your friends. You want your friends to feel for you. You don't want your friends to just do it because, or your lovers to do it just because it's their duty to make you happy.
So when I propose you just switch it around, why don't you keep the love up front and the duty at the back, like you
Okay.
the opposite of what you said.
Let's try the opposite way. So the love does all the motivation, so the bad grandmother misses out, right? You hate her.
You've got some duty there. You go see her, but not like the other one.
Okay, so no, but that's a different picture. That's not just the reverse. The suggestion was, as far as I got it, leave love in a different compartment, let duty do the motivation. Now, what you are suggesting is, let love do the motivation, and keep the duty not to motivate? No. You want it to motivate as well. Let both motivate?
Yeah.
Okay, so duty as well as, so the bad, I shouldn't say the grandmother you hate gets a visit because it's your duty. The grandmother you love gets a visit because you really want to be there with her. And so reason and passion or duty and emotion both have a role to play in motivating actions. Does that sound like a better picture of what should motivate? That does sound like a better picture. It is, in fact, the Humean picture, if you like. David Hume had this picture that reason alone or duty alone cannot motivate. We need passions as well. Because that's the kind of beings we are. But the trouble, what will be the trouble with this kind of picture?
I think you can say that passions motivate you to do some things that you do motivate you to do other things.
Yes.
You're arguing that you can't do this without passion.
you're going to be torn. You know, you're visiting the grandmother you love, and you know it's time to go. Well, duty tells you you should go to the other grandmother because it's Grandmother Day. And passion tells you. So, you know, people, I mean, it's nice to say what you're suggesting. It's nice to say that duty and passion should both. But the trouble is they pull in opposite directions. Then you don't get guidance on what you should do. Then we really don't know. We're always these individuals. And that's probably describing the human situation. You know, we are pulled by different things. We are sometimes pulled, I really want to stay at work and finish the paper I'm writing, but my dad's visiting from India. He is actually visiting from India right now. I'm really pulled in two directions in the evening. It's getting late. You know, I really don't go home that early, but right now it's a real struggle to stay at work and finish the thing I'm doing, or to go home and cook him a nice meal. So, you know, it's a real concern. That is the human situation. But then people say, well, what's the point of having a moral theory if it's not going to tell me what to do? What's the right thing to do? Right thing to do here is they pull in different directions.
It's kind of like, but you can compromise, you can use duty as a way to, deal, like, kind of comprehend and have to deal with the tough stuff. But you need that kind of, that love or that positive thing to help you make good choices, like, balance it out, like, you've got the duty, but you've also got what you love and stuff, and that will help you lead a good life.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And if you're thinking in that way, and also, like, relationships can't thrive, if it's just duty alone. People will not be very responsive to someone who's only doing something for duty, and you can't even really engage in conversations with people if you're doing it in that way.
I think I can sometimes engage in conversation. I've got one colleague, I must tell you, I won't name him. Well, it's a him. I've just told you something. I won't say anything more. But, nothing affects him. I look at it, I can tell him the worst thing in the world. And there's just no emotion on that person's face. Anyway, I just sometimes think, Graham, something should move you. I just say, something should move you, It doesn't happen. The guy's completely blank. But anyway, don't notice what I said. It's already been recorded. Oh, my God. I'm going to be in trouble. But I think I should ask them to wipe out this particular part. But I think you have a point there. We need a bit of balance between the two. And I think, there's something to be said about trying to get that balance. But when, this is the kind of demand we make on a moral theory. A moral theory is not just telling you, it's meant to be action guiding, right? So it's meant to be telling you what to do in all circumstances. And when you have, these opposing factors coming in, a balancing act can't be done by the theory. It has to be done by you. So people will say, this theory is not good enough because it is not action guiding. On the other hand, the other criticism of the theory can be, this theory is psychologically too demanding. So duty for duty's sake, or people say of utilitarianism, which always says, benefit all those who are going to be affected by your actions, not have any special relationships playing a role. That's just not what I can do. So, this just tells you how difficult it is to get moral philosophy, to do moral theory right, because the balancing has to be done by the individual, I think. But people make this demand that the theory should tell me what to do. If a moral theory, what's the point of a moral theory if it doesn't tell me? What am I supposed to do in these difficult situations? And moral theory, if you have both duty and emotions motivating, I don't think, because they pull in different directions, will give you a consistent theory, a theory that you can actually use.
With this whole duty and love thing, I'm surprised you haven't brought it up yet, but with the Mahabharata, Karna was torn between duty and love as well. Whilst he chose duty, he was still condemned and sent to, hell, right? But you said the Hindus chose duty every time, so why?
for that particular action, the Hindus, I'm not saying the Hindus always chose duty. The Hindus were asked to choose duty, were supposed to choose duty, but all of us falter. And these five brothers, the tale carries on in that epic Mahabharata after the Gita. And these five brothers actually, sort of are weak in some sense and do not always follow their duty and do all sorts of little bad things and end up in hell. That's the final journey that's described. So I think that epic, that story in itself is sort of showing that the human condition is such that it's not as easy. It's not as easy to be guided by, a clean-cut theory which clearly tells you what your duty is and just do it in a robotic way.
The only one that actually made it to Swaga was Yuddhi Shastra. The rest.
Yeah, the rest all the other brothers, the four brothers sort of fell down along the way, and the one brother makes it because he was called, what is it, Dharmraj or something,
Unless you're orthodox, 100%, like follow everything to the T, you won't make it.
You won't make it. Yeah, I mean, liberation's hard to get. The Hindus never said it was easy, right? And being a perfect utilitarian, being the perfect, even Peter Singer, who talks about alleviating world poverty. I will give you a break in a minute. Alleviating world poverty. Think about this. He's talked about this in an interview, and I think in writing as well. He says, what's the best use of resources? Given all the resources that we have, what's the best use of resources? Keeping someone alive who has no hope that they're going to lead a happy life. So imagine, sorry about the grandmother, poor grandmother is in hospital on life-saving, technology, lots of resources, 24%, cross-7 care, lots of machines, lots of things tied up, just keeping her alive, even though the quality of life is not very good, not very enjoyable. Right? On the other hand, all those resources, if you follow the utilitarian principles, they could be put to better use, sending them to third world countries, sending money to third world countries, blah, blah, blah. All sorts of things we could do to produce much more happiness, to produce, to do better in the world than keeping that person alive. Imagine this is Peter Singer's grandmother. It was actually his mother. And he said, it was very difficult to pull the plug. I know what the right thing to do is. I know exactly what my theory says. But do you think it was an easy decision to tell the doctor, yes, pull the plug on my loved one? It's not going to be easy for anyone to be a perfect utilitarian or a perfect, deontologist. Or, according to the Hindus, someone who follows the karma and the duty ethic, completely to its grain. No one said it's easy. The question I really want to end with, and I'm going to give you a break in a minute. The question I really want to end with, it's not just a question of it is not easy and it wasn't meant to be. Is it right to think that, moral theory should be so demanding, to leave out emotions? We can't have it both ways. If it's just emotions, we'll go in all different ways. If it's just duty, we become like robots. We have no feeling. Is that the best way to think about human flourishing? After all, all these ends of life, whether it's moksha, liberation, or whatever, it's to create the conditions, make us the best we can. The best we can is to be liberated, the best we can do. So is it really right to have this kind of ethic? I'll leave you with that question. It's not a question I can answer. It's not a question any, moral theory, East or West, can answer. But it's worth thinking about, that this is not an easy problem to deal with. 5-minute break, and we'll talk a little bit about comparison between points of difference between Hindus and Buddhists. Similarities and differences, and then I'll finish early today, I promise. I'm sorry for dragging it on until 10 past.